Hi, it's Dwyer. It's August 16th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Let me just say, this Moses Itauma demolition of Dillian Whyte, I was wrong on this fight. The betting play I recommended to premium subscribers was to take the over 4.5 rounds and to take Dillian Whyte straight up to win the fight. The odds allowed you to profit if either happened. I had never seen Dillian Whyte knocked out in the first round. Um, I just thought Dillian Whyte fully understood, and Dillian Whyte did some things that I liked in this fight. I thought Dillian Whyte understood that this young opponent had never made it past the sixth round, that the way to victory was to force this young guy to go into deeper waters in which he's never swam, right? And to test him a bit in the later rounds. Now, I was wrong. Let me make a couple of points. Let me also make another foundational point. The film's on YouTube. All of us can watch it. It's a short fight. We're all trying to figure out what happened, right? You're looking at the film, you're saying, well, what worked, what didn't work? Right around the minute-and-a-half mark of the first round, Moses Itauma throws, and Itauma's a southpaw. He throws his dominant hand. He throws his left hand, and I believe he hits Whyte right around here. It's an equilibrium shot. In other words, Whyte, who's clever. I liked Whyte's defense. Whyte has his right hand parked on the right side of his head for most of the fight, right? And he has a strategy where when Itauma comes in, Whyte is bending the arm to hide his head behind his guard, right? So Whyte is cognizant. He's aware of Moses Itauma's left hand the entire fight. But Itauma's playing chess here, right? Understand, Itauma, to get Whyte to loosen up his defense, Itauma starts throwing straight lefts, right? Straight lefts to Whyte's body, right? That's a key punch here, right? Straight lefts to Whyte's body. So Whyte, getting hit to the body, has to make a decision on how to protect his body. Now, he makes a mistake. Hindsight's 100%, right? Instead of moving away from Itauma, right? In other words, if you're close enough to him where the guy is able to hit you with straight lefts, his dominant hand, which you would imagine is his arm and back, right? It seems that Whyte should have moved over to Itauma's right side and should have moved away from him. Instead, Whyte ends up by the ropes, right? So Itauma, of course, changes the punch after hitting Whyte a couple of times in his ribs with a straight left. Itauma comes up top. It's right around the 130 mark. Might be 131. The 131 mark of the first round. Itauma comes up top with a left hook. Now understand, Whyte, who is alternating between having his hand at the right side of his head and going like this, right, to block shots coming in this direction. In other words, it's no secret. Whyte knows Itauma's left is lethal. Right? The problem is when Whyte goes like this, Itauma gets a punch in over the guard and it hits Whyte. Just imagine, in fact, here, I'll turn to this side because this is my right side. It hits him right here. It hits him high on his head, right? Right around, the video is confusing me. Let's just say right around here, right? It hits him right here on his head. For the remainder of the fight, Whyte doesn't have his balance. In other words, that shot opens the door to Whyte staggering. Whyte's badly hurt. He's staggering. He's messed up the ring placement because he's over by the ropes, right? He should have been in the middle of the ring. I believe that's how Usyk would play it, right? He should have had an escape route. Whyte instead is over by the side of the ropes, no escape route, no balance. So Itauma then steps in. It's not a one-punch type thing. He steps in, he then shifts gears. This is a guy with fast hands pretending his hands are slower. So he steps in, he then hits Whyte with some shots. And Whyte staggers and goes down. Now I know no one is going to stand up for Whyte right here. Let me. Right? I'm not saying Whyte's not off balance. I'm not saying Whyte is 100%. He's not. Right? He's been dropped to the canvas off a series of shots that involve shots to the body, right? Left hands to his body, then a left hand up top, then a combination from a young guy who opens up. But when Whyte gets up, it's the first round, folks. Whyte is a vet. In my opinion, the stoppage was just a tad premature. I'm not saying Itauma doesn't have explosive power. I'm not saying that Whyte was out of the woods and might not have been dropped a second time in that first round. But what I am saying is, you know Whyte's a veteran, right? Whyte gets up. Whyte has his wits about him. When the referee stops the fight, you see Whyte talking to the referee. Whyte can talk. Whyte isn't out of it. Whyte is lucid. I thought dominant performance by Itauma. I'm not taking away anything from him. He knocked Dillian Whyte down with time to spare in the first round. That's an accomplishment. Whyte is a very good fighter. I thought the referee, looking at Dillian, and it's true, Dillian is hurt from the 1 minute and 30-second mark of the first round. That's true. But I thought the referee should have reasoned, this is the first round. This guy got caught, he got dropped, I'm going to give him another chance. He's not reeling. He never turns his back to the referee. He is lucid enough to make facial expressions, make eye contact. I thought the stoppage here was a tad early, right? But make no mistake, what opens the door for the left hand up top on Dillian Whyte are the straight lefts to the body that Moses Itauma throws before he throws the right hand up top that kills Dillian Whyte's balance. Right then after that, of course, he's able to, throw punches. Now let me make another point. On the telecast, They point out that Dillian Whyte, who's throwing jabs, his jab is coming up short. Right now, Whyte's jabs, of course, are with his left hand. Understand, most of the action in this fight takes place between Dillian Whyte's right-handed defense and Moses Itauma's left side. Right? Itauma's not softening up Dillian Whyte with right hands to the body. No, it's lefts to the body. Right? Folks, my argument to you is simply, when the announcer on the telecast says Dillian Whyte's jabs are coming up short, that's the path Whyte should have pursued. His jabs are coming up short, great. That means Itauma is too far away. You have a guy who hasn't been past the 6th round. I mean, never as a pro. Right? We still, as we're here, we know Moses Itauma's a bad man. We have no idea. Again, we have no idea how this young guy would do if tested in the second half of a fight. Right? We're up at the stage where Itauma is scheduled to go 12 rounds, where you know the champion, Usyk, is a fellow southpaw. In other words, Itauma's left would line up with Usyk's non-dominant side. In other words, if Usyk parked the right hand by the right side of his face, and if Usyk's mindful of Itauma's straight lefts to his body, Usyk would still have, unlike Whyte, his dominant hand free. Right? Usyk would still have Usyk's dominant punch, his Ivan punch, the punch that he stopped Daniel Dubois with in their second fight. Right? He would still have all of that. Also, Usyk, looking at this film, is going to notice the ropes right behind Dillian Whyte. And Usyk, of course, is going to make a mental note not to get caught on the ropes. Understand, too, Itauma, and I know this is a first-round knockout, but this is not a Derek Chisora pressure performance. In other words, Itauma's taking his time. When the commentator on the telecast tells you that Whyte's jabs are coming up short, that's because Itauma is too far away from him. This is different than Derek Chisora, who, when he fought Usyk, is in the pocket, deep in the pocket with Usyk. Right? Itauma does not smother Dillian Whyte. Right? Just understand, he does not smother Dillian Whyte. Rather, what he's doing is he sees Whyte's defense. He sees Whyte's right hand up by the side of his head, and he's taking shots to Whyte's body to loosen up Whyte's defense. Right? Whyte is prepared to, have an elbow up by the side of his head and stuff like that. He wasn't prepared for the straight lefts to his body, which land flush. So then, of course, those lefts loosen things up. Then Itauma wisely comes high on Whyte. And it's the high shot on the side of Whyte's head that throws off Whyte's balance. Right? Then, of course, Itauma then jumps in the pocket, has quick hands, throws a combination that gets Whyte onto the canvas. That's the fight. So, Itauma announced that he wanted to fight either Joe Parker, and understand, this fight was in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh season, Riyadh Season has announced that they have no interest in supporting a Joe Parker fight against Usyk, which is shocking, right? Or Ajit Kabayel, also named by Moses Itauma, right? Itauma went further and said he's willing to fight Usyk, but he understands there's a pecking order. That other guys, namely Parker and Kabayel, have put themselves in position to deserve the shot against Usyk. Right now, you know my feeling on Usyk. If I'm Usyk, there's always going to be that young guy out there. There's always going to be that competitor out there. Right? Sooner or later, you have to walk away. I'm guessing Usyk has banked a few dollars, given that he's fought 3 of the UK's top fighters twice each. That's 6 fights, folks. That's 6 paydays. And that, of course, would come after a exalted cruiserweight run, right? Think about it. And, of course, there are other guys. Chisora, Witherspoon, who Usyk beat at heavyweight. And he had another fight with Tony Bellew, too, right? So I'm guessing Usyk has money in the bank. My point is simply, when you're undisputed and you're unbeaten, how much higher can you go? Why risk an unbeaten record on tough guys? And the guys today are tough, right? People look at Usyk, they think there might be a weakness to the body. Well, that's Kabayel's favorite spot to hit, right? Joe Parker, ring coverage. Parker can be far away from you, throw a big shot, and land on you. Isn't that what he did to Martin Bakole? Right? Of course, Bacole's still out there, but we'll concede. The loss to Joe Parker put him further back in the queue, but Bacole's actually supposed to have sparred with Usyk, giving him problems. Now you have Moses Itauma, right? And Itauma, unlike other Usyk competitions, actually a southpaw. So things get different. Things get interesting. Right? So Itauma, politician, you can tell. Right? He says, hey, I want to fight Parker or Kabayel. And if I beat them, then I want to take on Usyk. He's respectful of the process. Right? But folks, Usyk is a guy with some of the best stamina in boxing. Dillian Whyte here, and Whyte has a back foot. That's what makes it so puzzling. Dillian Whyte here doesn't take advantage of the spacing early. If Whyte's too far away to land his jab, isn't that playing into Whyte's game? Isn't the idea to take this out of the early rounds where Itauma has established his punching power and take this into the middle and later rounds? If you're the veteran fighter here, hey, if the young guy's too far away, hey, sounds good to me. My jab's accomplishing its purpose. Even if I'm throwing the jab and it's coming up short, if it, slows down the fight and keeps this young guy far away from me. Right? Whyte is too front foot here. Whyte realizes that his jab's coming up short, so what does he do? He continues moving forward. Then when the tide in the fight turns on him, he ends up backing up into the ropes and has nowhere to go. No exit path. And he has a young guy determined to throw left hands. So it's at least a couple of straight lefts to the body, right? Whyte should have turned. Think Mayweather. Whyte's left shoulder should have been between the two of them, right? Whyte also isn't in a position. Whyte's too much on the defensive at this point. He's not in a position where he can step forward and grab Itauma, who doesn't stay in the pocket. Let me repeat that. He doesn't stay in the pocket. This is a guy who's outside, then comes inside, boom, straight left to the body. Then he comes back outside. Right? In other words, Itauma is relying on timing and movement. Whyte should have taken, hindsight's 100%, he should have taken a page out of the Roy Jones playbook, the Thomas Hearns playbook, and thrown a lot of feints at Itauma, right? Because Itauma, again, is not Derek Chisora, ignoring feints, deep in the pocket, making you work, applying pressure on you, constant pressure. That's not this young fighter. This is the fighter looking for openings so he can drop a, left leg, right? Because he's a southpaw, and then throw lefts to your body. Right? That's who this guy is. So you have to confuse him on when he can drop that left leg, don't you? Dillian Whyte should have had a side profile like a Mayweather would have. Right? Had a shoulder between himself and Itauma. Right? Should have, had his guard up. Should have not had his body in such a way where Itauma could find his body with his straight left. In other words, Dillian Whyte's too parallel to Moses Itauma. Anyway, those are my thoughts. This video is much longer than the actual fight. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I'm in shock. I wasn't expecting this. I thought Whyte would try to prolong the fight, not actually engage this guy. Right? I thought if Whyte got touched by a straight left to the body, I thought Whyte would try to pivot away, move away, force this young guy to actually move his feet to find him, not end up against the ropes, right? Trying to guess whether that next left is up top or down at the body. Right? So, big win for Moses Itauma. I don't mean to take anything away from him. I know I'm going to get 3 or 4 comments in the comment section saying, Dwyer, you wanted Whyte to get killed. How could you have wanted this fight to continue? Right? I think the stoppage was a little bit premature. I'm just telling you the way I see it. Right? Whyte was ready for the kid, but didn't seem to quite know how to deal with the kid's left to his body, which landed. Right? And then, of course, Itauma, I'll give him credit, he's an accurate puncher. Whyte does have a defensive guard up. Somehow, Itauma's able to hit him high on the head. And Itauma hits hard enough where Whyte's equilibrium was shaken. Whyte lost his balance on that punch. Those are my thoughts. Fight lingered into other punches, but that punch, again, it's right around the 130 mark. That punch is the key punch of that first round. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I'm cautious here. I know there are going to be a group who, like we were in the 80s, think this is a paradigm shift. Are going to say, my God, this guy hit so hard, and this guy's so efficient. This fight didn't even make it 3 minutes. How could anyone beat him? Just understand, this is not the first fighter to have a string of early KOs. Right? You might recall guys trying to prolong Tyson fights. Bone Crusher Smith. You remember back in the 80s, we called him Bone Hugger Smith. Right? Came in and hugged Mike Tyson. Right? The idea was, I'm not going to get knocked out. I'm going to clinch this guy until we get into the later rounds. Right? If he fights Usyk, just understand, Usyk is pre-punch. In other words, he's going to look at this film and he's going to say, okay, being over by the ropes is not the best place to be against this fighter. right? You know, I have to prepare for this kid to try to hit me in the stomach area. Understand the way it lines up, southpaw against southpaw. Usyk would have his non-dominant right shoulder in front of him. If he's able to come in perpendicular rather than parallel, right? Moses Itauma might have a hard time landing straight lefts to Usyk's body. Usyk might even be ready to throw right hooks if Itauma tries to lean into the pocket on that side. Right? Let's just say it's not a done deal that Itauma, who's still not champion, beats Alexander Usyk or beats Joe Parker. Right? I will say, because Itauma is as nimble as he is, right? Because he moves a bit better than Makhmudov and Zhili Zhang, I believe his style would give Kabayel problems. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.